Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Martin. I am the Executive Director of the Fine Cacao and Chocolate Institute and a lecturer based at Harvard University in the Department of African and African American Studies. Today, I am recording this video to share details from a survey that we at FCCI conducted over the past 2 weeks on the impact of COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, to cacao production and trade. And I will get to those details in just a moment. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge all of our colleagues who have supported us in making this survey possible and in disseminating the survey to those who might benefit from the data that we've collected. In particular, our colleagues at the Specialty Coffee Association have been very helpful in discussing the ways in which to design a survey like this, the ways in which we might disseminate it and then share information gathered by that survey responsibly. A number of different private companies, cooperatives of cacao, and other organizations have worked very hard to share this survey, even going so far in some cases as to supporting cacao producers in replying to the survey via WhatsApp or other means. And we have also benefited from the support of a number of different scholars in the fields of public health, agricultural economics, and anthropology in designing the survey, analyzing its results, and making sure that what we're presenting to you today is fair and balanced. Additionally, I would like to share that what I will now present to all of you is preliminary. It is part of a larger analysis of a great number of data points that came in with this survey. And so it is the beginning of an analysis. It is not the end of an analysis. Because we've collected so much data through this survey, we believe that it's necessary to release communication about it in multiple parts. So this is the first part of multiple, which will be released over the coming weeks with further information. Essentially, what I'm going to try to do is share with you a summary of the overall picture of what the data collected in the survey can show us, and then we will supplement that with more specific data points as time goes on. I also want to share that we are able to segment a lot of this data in different ways. So, for example, you may be a company, a cacao producer, a cooperative in one specific part of the world, for example, Central America. We are able to separate out many of the answers that we've received to focus on Central America and give different information based on those results. This is always a challenge. It's not the easiest thing to do to collect a flash poll like this. It's certainly not easy in a time when many of our colleagues in this industry are ill, are facing illness in their communities, are facing major interruptions in their work. But the information that we have collected is from a large enough number of organizations that we feel we can make responsible recommendations based on that data. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is share with all of you my screen, which will allow you to see the slides that we have collected and to give a more or less summary overview of what we found in this poll. So you'll see here, this is a flash poll on the impact of COVID-19 on cacao production and trade. And before I even get into any of the specific data, I would like to make sure that everyone is clear on the fact that this is data collected primarily from a large network of organizations that have some links to the fine or specialty cacao production and trade world. So these are not organizations on the whole that identify primarily as selling into the bulk or conventional cacao marketplace. And that's important because there are two countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, that are responsible for producing currently about 60% of the world's cacao. And those two countries are not represented in the data that I will now share with you. In fact, this data that I will share with you applies much more to the 40% of cacao that is not produced by Ghana, or by Cote d'Ivoire. It would be possible to conduct a poll like this in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, but of course would require a different set of circumstances than the ones that we were able to catalyze or activate for this particular poll. So please keep that in mind. It's a very important caveat of what we will share here. Now, for this particular survey, we have had 159 respondents. The number of cacao operations around production, trade that are engaged in specialty cacao in the world is probably in the hundreds. So the fact that we've received 159 responses is promising in that the information we're able to share here is perhaps more representative overall. You'll see that 39% of the respondents are from Central America or the Caribbean. That's represented in blue. 33% of respondents are from South America. 16.4% of respondents are from Asia, Australia, or the Pacific Islands. 5% are from Europe, 4.4% are from North America, and then the smallest percentage here is reporting from Africa, about 2 to 3% coming from Africa, and all of the respondents that have sent in survey from Africa are respondents that are almost exclusively engaged in the specialty cacao and chocolate market. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. If we continue, you can see we've had a number of different organizations respond to this poll. We have small producer organizations making up the majority. These are cooperatives, associations, individual small producers of cacao at 36.5%. 17.6% of the respondents are from medium or large scale plantations or private estates. But of course, these are not the only organizations that are involved in cacao production or trade. So we've also received 13% of responses from national chocolate companies, 10 to 11% from national cocoa traders or exporters, 6.3% from technical services providers, 4% from NGOs, 4% from international cocoa traders or exporters, and 4% from international chocolate companies. And that's because all of these different companies do have engagement with cacao production and trade that made this survey relevant to them and makes their responses relevant to our understanding as well. Now, when we looked at the revenue of these organizations, we were doing this in order to understand how large these organizations are and also how much financial wiggle room or liquidity might exist for them organizationally. And you'll see 47.8% represented in blue here of these organizations are coming in at under 100,000 US dollars per year. 19.5% are between 100 and 250,000 US dollars per year. 11.3% between 250 and 750,000 US dollars per year. 11.9% between 750 and 2.5 million US dollars per year. And then considerably fewer, 5%, 4% in the 2.5 million to $10 million or over $10 million US per year range. So again, these are relatively small organizations that are responding, and we can assume from that that they may not have a large degree of financial risk absorption possibility. We asked all of these organizations to describe to them the impact that they're experiencing, first within a 6-month time frame, so from now to within 6 months from now. And you'll see that the largest number, 63.5%, report that this is a significant impact, specifically a negative impact from the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. 10.1% of these organizations describe this as an existential threat, meaning something that could put them out of business. And the rest of the organizations describe this as having some negative impact, a minimal negative impact, or suggest that they are unsure of what the impact will be within a 6-month time frame. These numbers change a bit, but not a lot if we move to the 12 to 24-month time frame. So as these organizations try to imagine into the future, still 9.4% report an existential threat, meaning that their businesses could potentially go out of business as a result of the impact of COVID-19 on their businesses. 50%, 48.4%, report a significant impact, 32.7% report some impact, and 5% report minimal impact. Another 4% say that they are unsure. So we're hopeful that this gives a sense of the relative squeeze or fear that organizations are currently experiencing about the impact to their businesses. We also asked for organizations to report to us their sales decrease. And we asked, for them to then share a number as to how much they believe their sales to be decreasing. At least 20% sales decrease was reported by 87% of respondents. So that's a large majority of respondents that are experiencing at least a 20% sales decrease. At least a 50% sales decrease was reported by 52% of respondents. At least an 80% sales decrease was reported by 18% of respondents, and at least a 90% sales decrease was reported by 10% of respondents. So again, that gives you a sense of the type of sales decrease that these different respondents are reporting. We've also asked respondents for expenses increases. How much are they experiencing? At least 10% expenses increase is occurring in 72% of respondents. At least 25% expenses increase was reported by 36% of respondents, and at least a 50% expenses increase was reported by 8% of respondents. Now, we have short answers about what are these types of expense increases that people are seeing. They are, for example, seeing FOB expense increases at origin. They're seeing increases in warehousing costs as they need to warehouse longer. For example, if ports are closed or shipping is delayed or buying is delayed or reduced. They're also seeing challenges in accessing personal protective equipment and cleaning materials that would allow them to enhance their cleaning and protective measures among their staff, and that has increased their expenses. So these are, in general, the type of expenses that people are reporting to us. We've also asked about staffing decreases to see how many of these respondents are responding to the impact of COVID-19 by either laying off, furloughing, or letting workers go. At least 10% staffing decrease is reported by 39% of respondents. At least a 25% staffing decrease is reported by 31% of respondents. At least a 50% staffing decrease is reported by 22% of respondents, and at least a 75% staffing decrease is reported by 14% of respondents. So again, we're not seeing massive layoffs or firings, but we are seeing a staffing decrease by many of the different respondents that are reporting on this survey. We also asked these businesses to share with us information about what types of impacts they're experiencing. And they were able to check each that applied to their particular business. The largest impact that people are seeing is a loss of sales. Right after that is a reduced demand. So 72% loss of sales, 68% reduced demand. 65% are reporting a loss of cash flow reserves. 62% of loss of future sales. 62% have reduced their in-country travel. 60% have seen a supply chain disruption, for example, an interruption in shipping, an interruption in their ability to access materials. 59% have seen cancellation of events. 53% have reported a reduction in interactions with suppliers. 49% are reporting production interruptions, meaning harvest or post-harvest interruptions. 47% payment delays. 43% shortage of supplies. 42% a reduction in workforce, 38% certification delays, 32% halt of harvest or purchase of cacao, 30% increased and sustained worker absences, 29% changes in supplier financing structures, 26% stockpiling of raw materials, 24% paperwork delays, 20% reduction of credit from banks, 19% increased legal or insurance cost, 14% report loss of inventory, and 3%, so a very small number, report any kind of increase in their sales. So this gives a sense of the different types of impacts and where they appear to be most concentrated at present. As you can see, this is really in many ways an across-the-board impact, as it is across the economy and the social system globally due to COVID-19. We also asked for the different respondents to share their level of confidence that their sales are on track for this year. Very few of them were confident or very confident that their sales are on track. So 3.1% reported that they're very confident, 9.4% reported that they are confident. 14.5% reported that they were neutral about their confidence in sales. But the numbers get much larger when it comes to unconfident. 32.7% report that they are unconfident that their sales are on track for what they had imagined for this year. 40.3% are very unconfident. And this is where an important message is necessary. Many people shared with us on this survey that they have been responding to perceived risk in the market intuitively or instinctually without data that they might need to forecast or to make predictions about how much cacao to buy, to sell, to harvest, and so on. That is where we see a great deal of potential risk. So people are making decisions based on their fear related to how much risk they can absorb, but without the necessary data to make these decisions critically informed. That leads to some of our preliminary recommendations, but as much as possible, people should be trying to make any decisions here with better data rather than based on anecdotal or emotional responses. We also asked organizations if they have insurance that would in any way cover business interruptions or loss due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a very striking answer. 91.8% of the different organizations that have responded here do not have insurance that would support them in this way. 6.3% are unsure, and only 1.9% report having this type of insurance that could support them. We can also then look at information availability. And what you can see here is that when it comes to information on the coronavirus pandemic, 62.9%, so a majority of these organizations have information that is widely available to them. Now, a limited availability or an availability only if organizations share it is found in 26.4% or 10.1%. And so that means that there is about over a third of these different organizations that do not have enough information about what is going on with the coronavirus pandemic, or they only have that information if they're actively sharing it with their different stakeholders. A small proportion, so only 0.6%, report that information is not available at all to them. Beyond that, we asked people about different transit restrictions that they might be facing related to cacao production and trade. 50% of the different organizations that responded report that they are observing shelter in place following local rules, regulations, or laws. 13.2% are moving about without any restriction. That's the smallest number here. 13.8% of organizations are actually under martial law, meaning that they are prohibited from moving about without special exemptions. And then 22% have been able to arrange that they are moving with special permission from local authorities in order to move about in their area. And of course, these different transit restrictions will have an impact depending on the harvest and post-harvest schedule on whether cacao production is able to continue without considerable interruptions. We also asked to try to gauge the level of information that these organizations have about their workforces, whether or not they're aware of any pre-existing health conditions in their workforces. And this is because in certain areas, cacao producers are already more likely to have, for example, different respiratory illnesses. They may also have insect-borne disease burdens that they bear in their areas. These would be considered pre-existing pre-existing conditions that would impact them as to their level of risk were they to contract the coronavirus COVID-19. And now a third of these organizations, 33.3%, reported that they are unsure about the pre-existing conditions within their workforces. Now, another third said that no, they do not believe that their workforce has any of these pre-existing conditions. And a third said that yes, they believe that their workforce has these pre-existing conditions. And this is important information that we will get to down the line as we share more results as to what kind of public health responses will be necessary and what the responsibility is of different organizations in addressing health concerns among their workforce. We've also seen a question related to test availability, asking these different organizations whether COVID-19 testing is available in their areas. And you'll see that a large number of these organizations report that COVID-19 testing is difficult to access in those areas, so 43.4%. Related to this, 22.6% of organizations have shared here that COVID-19 testing is actually unavailable in their areas. 5.7% report that COVID-19 testing is available to all, whereas 28.3% report that it is available to those that are deemed eligible. And of course, the ability to test and to know who is sick is a really key part of any public health response and what we're trying to better understand here. When it comes to workforce access to medical care, to other healthcare options, we also received the following responses. 55% of the organizations that responded found that affordable emergency medical care is available and accessible to their workforces. 52% report that paid sick leave is available to their workforces. 43% report that affordable regular medical care is is available to their workforces. 40% report that very limited medical care options are available to their workforces, and only 34% report that safe or affordable quarantine facilities are available to their workforces. So this is additional information that can help us to understand the particular medical challenges that might be being faced in these areas. When it comes to the priority of COVID-19 communications, we were also curious to learn how much the organizations responding were prioritizing these communications with their workforce. 71.7% report that these communications were a high priority. 21.4% report that these were medium priority. And 6.9% report that these were low priority communications. So that's, again, information that is useful for those who would like to make recommendations as to how to reprioritize or change priorities in these different situations. We also asked organizations how they are, in particular, responding to the impact of COVID-19 within their organizations, what they are doing to try and address this impact directly. 77% reported that they are reducing in-country travel. 70% are changing in-person meetings to virtual where possible. 70% are encouraging or requiring employees who exhibit symptoms of COVID-19 to stay at home. 70% are implementing more rigorous cleaning processes in workspaces. 70% are staying informed via news media and updates from public health officials. 67% are rescheduling or canceling events or meetings or trainings. 60% are communicating regularly with your networks about their coronavirus preparedness. 58% are reducing interactions with suppliers. 54% are increasing digital marketing efforts. 53% are implementing a remote work policy for employees who do not need to be on site. 52% are seeking additional financing, such as a loan. 31% are changing supplier financing structures. 31% are changing pricing structures for business partners. 30% are furloughing or laying off their workforce. 19% are halting harvest or purchase of cacao. And 12% are engaging in the stockpiling of raw materials. So these are the ways in which these different organizations are responding to this impact. But of course, knowing how intense the impact is in certain areas, these responses are often what these organizations are able to do. There may be more that they would like to do, but that they are unable to do. And of course, we all know that cacao production cannot be done in a vacuum, cannot always be done while observing physical distancing, and that these are pretty considerable interruptions to business as things operate normally. We've also asked these organizations about what they are doing to prepare their workforces for the impact of COVID-19. And 86% have reported that they are educating workers about hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. 80% are limiting gatherings of large groups of people. 77% are requiring workers not to come to work if they are ill. 74% are limiting non-essential visits and travel. 70% are providing alcohol-based sanitizer, things like tissues, lined trash cans, or other personal protective equipment at the work site. 69% are requiring working at a distance of 2 meters or 6 feet, the recommended physical distancing for the attempt to stop the spread of COVID-19. 56% are canceling farm tours. 53% are training employees on additional protective measures. 52% are performing routine environmental cleaning in high traffic areas. 50% are changing processes to reduce risk of exposure. 45% are notifying the local health department about workers with presumptive cases of COVID-19. 35% are adapting methods of transportation of cacao. 28% are translating important health and safety information into an appropriate local language. 21% are rehousing workers with symptoms of COVID-19. 18% are conducting contact tracing of workers with presumptive cases or diagnoses. 18% are altering typical centralized post-harvest processing methods or aggregation of cacao from various producers. 15% are using organizational communication tools to provide key messaging about COVID-19 and worker safety. And a small number, 2%, are using organizational spaces or resources to provide medical support. And this gives a sense of the different ways that organizations are preparing workforces. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, just as any of these lists are not exhaustive. But we developed these lists in concert with over 24 different organizations that are engaged in this response right now. And we feel that it is more or less comprehensive to the different types of responses that currently exist. Now, that then brings me to our preliminary recommendations. What we feel that we can say at this point, having shared this amount of data and having analyzed it. They fall in 3 different categories. The first is in the area of public health. It's very clear from this data that instituting best practices for physical and social distancing is essential in all of these cacao and production trade operations. Beyond that, better understanding local health context and then adapting community and institutional responses as appropriate is also necessary. And within all of this, addressing social difference and hierarchies in access to care is essential. It's clear from the data, it's clear from what we know beyond even cacao production and trade, and in a much more global context, that there are very significant social differences and hierarchies that are impacting people's access to good medical care right now that must be addressed. And that addressing these will also be essential to ensuring the public health of those engaged in cacao production and trade. Beyond that, there are economic considerations for which we can make preliminary recommendations that again come out of this data that's being shared. The first is that it is clear for a majority of organizations that they need to put in place plans to address what will be the loss of sales, reduced demand, or reduced cash flow as a result of the impact of COVID-19. And many organizations have already been working on this, but those that have not should be doing this now. And as much as possible, this needs to be done by working to forecast these losses, these reductions reductions in demand, these reductions in cash flow with partners, as is legally and culturally appropriate. These should not be decisions that are being made without the appropriate information, without the appropriate critical thinking that is necessary. So moving to make these kinds of decisions based on intuition or emotion is not an appropriate response in this case. Beyond this, communication is probably the number one thing that these different organizations report as supporting them in successful responses to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their businesses or their organizations. And that means very specifically two-way, bilateral, and multilateral communication with and among cacao producers as those that are least likely to have information, and with and among downstream and upstream stakeholders throughout the supply chain. Now, to put this in the context of this particular survey, we know in this case that if there is any bias in this survey, it is actually that those organizations that are the least connected, that might be experiencing the highest degree of illness or impact of COVID-19, are those that are least likely to have responded. So in fact, the people that are perhaps most aggrieved by the impact of COVID-19 are also those that are least likely to have been able to contribute to this survey, meaning that this type of communication that we are recommending here is all the more essential. It needs to reach those people who, due to social difference, due to hierarchies of access, do not have access to information right now. And that really calls into question one of our biggest concerns in all of this, which is what are the moral and ethical responsibilities of different organizations in responding to this impact of COVID-19, which is, without any doubt, a massive and global impact. And in order to better understand how we might approach this, we have been conducting research on past events that might in some way shed light on what's occurring today. We have looked at the so-called Spanish flu, the influenza pandemic of the 1918 era, and its impact on cocoa production, which was in certain areas quite devastating. We've looked at other major interrupting events. It's, however, rare that there are events that are this global in their scope and their scale. And so we believe that it's essential that different organizations working today ask themselves what it is to do in terms of their responsibility in the present and what their responsibility might look like in 12 to 24 months as we believe we might be coming out of this pandemic situation. For example, is it appropriate that a large part of a workforce might be let go? Will that workforce be able to return in 12 to 24 months? Or will that workforce be renewed? What do these different decisions look like, and how might they impact on organizations, but especially on communities over time? These are the really essential questions that we think organizations need to be asking themselves, and that they need to be in conversation with their different partners in order to make sure that their moral and ethical responses to this are as robust as perhaps their economic or business-based responses might be. And that is because if it is the case that large portions of different populations engaged in cacao production and trade are sickened by the COVID-19 pandemic, are significantly impacted economically by the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to be forecasting, we need to be planning as much as possible for what their lives will look like after the pandemic, as much as we're thinking about what cacao production and trade might look like after the pandemic. And we certainly can't do that alone. We can't do it in silos, and we can't do it without lack of information. And that is an area that we are hoping to be able to help with as time goes on. Thank you to all of you for tuning in, for your patience as we roll out this research, and for your understanding and engagement with this data. We look forward to continuing the conversations with many of you as time goes on. Take good care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay safe.